Yes, welcome everyone. We are just waiting. So, to the people get in. Hola, bienvenidas, bienvenidos, bienvenides. Estamos esperando a que las personas se vayan conectando. Daremos un par de minutos. We're going to wait a couple of minutes so the people can get in. Okay. I think that we have 29 in the room, so maybe we can start. So, welcome everyone. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas, bienvenides. We are so happy to have you all today. We are going to have this conversation in English and Spanish. If you need translation, please access through the translation button in the bottom of your screen. Vamos a tener esta conversación en inglés y en español. Pueden acceder a la traducción en el botón que verán en la parte de abajo de su pantalla. My name is Andrea Villaseñor. I'm the director of the migration program at Hispanics in Philanthropy. This is the 5th webinar of the series centering frontline voices across the Americas. This is a collective and collaborative effort to bring essential conversations around migration and their intersectionalities. I want to thank especially today to the International Community Foundation, For Freedoms Fund, and Environmental Grantmakers Association for being part today, today's conversation, confronting racism in the migration movement. Also, I want to thank you, Ronald, Claude from Baji, Gladys, Susul, muchas gracias, and Dina James from Sandcross Foundation. And I want also to introduce formally Jose Antonio Aguilar, who will be moderating today. Jose Antonio Aguilar, he is a social entrepreneur and filmmaker. He is the founder and director of Racismo MX, an organization whose mission is to acknowledge and eradicate systematic racism in Mexico by building the capacities of young anti-racist leaders, generating new data and research, and launching innovative public communication initiatives. Currently, he also develops a documentary about how racism works in Mexico and the collective solutions to tackle it. Welcome, Jose Antonio, Pepe, and thank you for being today with us.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for that warm presentation. And thanks, of course, to Hispanics in Philanthropy, the For Freedoms Fund, the Environmental Grantmakers Association, and the International Community Foundation. So, well, as Andrea said, my name is Jose, and I lead this organization called Racismo MX, or Racism in Mexico. An organization whose mission, is to fight against racism in Mexico and analyze how racism manifests in other parts of the world. Our organization work centers on education, communication strategies, and research. And in this last pillar, on the research pillar, we lead the Observatory on Racism in Mexico and Central America, which is a community of practice among organizations working on racial equity in the region. One of the first publications of the observatory is what we call the Racistometer, or Racistómetro, a social listening tool that measures the narratives around race and racism on social media in Mexico. And the observatory is also a space for education for all this network of organizations, for us to have and win more racial literacy, which has been erased in our region for so many time, no? And for our history. With this background, it's my pleasure to be here with you today and I will introduce our amazing panelists that are already here. I heard that Diana James from the St. Croix Foundation for Community Development will connect later. So I will introduce first Gladys Sulsul. It's a Maya Quiche activist, public intellectual, sociologist, and visual artist who was one of the first to study indigenous communal politics and gender relationships in Guatemala. Her scholarly work focuses on the relationships of indigenous women within their communities and with larger political structures, such as federal governments. Indigenous land ownership is also one of her key beliefs. She has conducted research in Guatemala, Ecuador, Honduras, and Mexico. Welcome, Gladys. Bienvenida, Gladys, por acompañarnos el día de hoy. Secondly, but not less important, is Ronald Claude. He was a legislative assistant with the office of Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. He has done policy work on transportation, immigration, and foreign policy related issues. As a proud son of the immigrant story is one that he is deeply familiar with, and is the space and community where he would like to continue to serve. He works with the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, BAJI, to ensure Black migrants and the diaspora as a whole are not left behind when we make policy. In his spare time, Ronald loves soccer, and his favorite team is Barcelona, and now we are friends, and can mostly be found playing or watching soccer in his free time. Welcome, Ronald. So I will start asking Gladys in this first round of questions. So I will switch to Spanish. Voy a preguntarte, Gladys, en esta primera ronda a ti, bueno, para hablar justamente del racismo en la migración. Y es bien importante que cuando hablemos de racismo, hablemos de las causas estructurales de este racismo y de su relación con la migración. ¿Cuáles, desde tu perspectiva, Gladys, son estas causas estructurales del racismo en la migración?
Hola, José, muy buenas tardes a todos que nos estén escuchando. Mira, creo que es preciso, en primer lugar, para mí, presentar una interpretación del racismo. Y creo que si pensamos el racismo como la estructura que inscribe diferenciaciones en la organización del poder, pues nos vamos a encontrar con que estas estructuras que organizan el poder determinan quién vive y quién muere, qué vidas merecen vivir y qué vidas se merecen no ser vividas. Bueno, y en ese sentido, esa perspectiva para mí es muy importante porque nos permite comprender, en tanto inscribamos al racismo como mecanismo de organización del poder, a las luchas territoriales, las luchas por la dignidad de la vida y la lucha por los derechos lingüísticos que no se encuentran escindidos, es decir, territorio y lengua, territorio y derechos se encuentran íntimamente conectados tanto en los territorios indígenas de estos estados por debajo de la frontera, como también después de la frontera. De hecho, entre las causas estructurales de por qué las comunidades indígenas tienen que desplazarse obedecen al patrón de acumulación global que funciona a partir de una estructura racista. Es decir, los procesos de despojo territorial, los procesos de aplanamiento de las políticas ciudadanas por encima de las estructuras comunales son causas estructurales por las cuales las comunidades se tienen que desplazar. Adentro de todos estos procesos hay venas importantes y una vena de ellas pues es la lengua y en tal medida que en los estados en los que vivimos, en estos estados, nación, tanto Guatemala como México, con todo lo problemático que es, la lengua no sea una parte fundamental que los estados respeten, eso también provoca procesos de desplazamiento. Y eso se extiende hasta también la atención de los derechos en Estados Unidos. Gran parte de los trabajadores la industria de la alimentación, de la agricultura, de la limpieza, de la construcción, por nombrar unos cuantos sectores que sostienen la economía en Estados Unidos, pues son trabajos que son realizados por migrantes indígenas que se encuentran con procesos de violación de sus derechos al trabajo porque no se respeta la lengua o porque no se garantiza la lengua. Como dice Odilia Romero, directora de Cielo, el derecho al intérprete o el respeto a los derechos lingüísticos no es un servicio, sino más bien es una obligación y un derecho. Creo que viendo desde esas lógicas, podemos comprender, pues, cómo estas causas estructurales del racismo por el desplazamiento se extienden o tienen como respuesta estos procesos de desplazamiento y se enfrentan también a otras problemáticas que complejizan la vida de lo político en una sociedad como la norteamericana. De hecho, creo que para todos quienes están sintonizando o para quienes asisten a este programa, no se puede comprender eso que se llama la política estadounidense sin comprender estas lógicas de exclusión y de organización del poder que responden a estos códigos racistas o esta arquitectura racista que le da forma a la política. En ese sentido, me parece que podemos pensar la estructura desde distintos puntos.
Muchísimas gracias, Gladys. Coincido, ¿no? con los puntos que mencionas. Uno de ellos, pues, es este tema de la necropolítica o decidir quién vive y quién no vive, ¿no? Este concepto que ya hemos analizado y que desde luego sucede en los países de la región, México, Centroamérica y Sudamérica. Y también esto que apuntabas, ¿no? De las estructuras racistas que generan flujos migratorios de países de América Latina hacia el norte generalmente, pero que luego llegan y se inscriben en otra sociedad igualmente racista con unas lógicas que a lo mejor tienen manifestaciones diferentes, pero que igualmente oprime a estas poblaciones, ¿no? Entonces, ahí es un poco donde convergen estas dos opresiones. Muchísimas gracias, Gladys. Ahora voy a pasar regreso a inglés para ir con Donald. Donald, thank you very much. We were talking with Gladys about the structural causes of racism, and I would like to give you now the space for you to give us your thoughts about the structural causes of racism in migration. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thank you for having me. And you know, I work with Baji, Baji, which is a Black national organization that fights for the rights of African Americans and Black migrants through organizing, legal advocacy, and research policy, with the hope of improving the conditions Black communities face towards their fight for racial justice and migrant rights. And I guess to answer your question, I think we have to start with the simple fact that one statistic that I like to share whenever I have the opportunity to be in these types of spaces and conversation is that Black immigrants who have contact with the criminal legal system have a 76% chance of being deported compared to the 45% of the immigrant population overall. And if you're Caribbean, it only goes up to 83%. And where that all starts is the factor is that I think that countries like the United States, because I think we have to also be clear, I think we are here engaging with what happens in the Americas, particularly with the United States between the US and Mexico border. But the issue of migration and the trouble that Black migrants especially face is a global crisis. So I just want to be clear on that front. But I think where it starts is that migration is a human right, as a human right, is not unprecedented. People migrate and they have a right to seek refuge. But being a Black migrant, when you try to execute that right or to take that process to seek refuge, you often come to face with the criminal legal system that the US already perpetuates in their legal system. And it is now it has now taken up the civil immigration space as well. So when Black migrants reach our border, instead of being presented with safety and support of benefits, whatever the relief may be, they're detained. And then they'll go through a process where it is sped through by getting a number in line that you don't even know what that means, and then you get to someone and you don't even know if your case is going to be heard or be translated in the language you speak. And then and sometimes you can see a separation of your family. Some of your family is good to stay, another some of your family is put on planes and sent back to the place they were seeking refuge from to begin with. And that doesn't get into the stories of what happens when folks try to go through the Darien Gap, that are stuck in Tapachula, where there is, as Gladys was mentioning, not translation, of what languages they speak. They don't have access to health care, and they're trapped essentially in a town in southern Mexico that they don't have any family or connections to navigate, and the journey for where they would like to seek refuge is blocked and impeded. So I know that is a helicopter view of what the situation is, but I think to get at your question, the reality is that there's a difference between how Black migrants are treated versus other migrants group, including the Guawifuna people, the indigenous people in Central America. Because when it comes down to it, Black migrants, because of the color of their skin, don't get the benefit of the doubt, and they don't receive the same sympathy. And the last point I will make that I think sums it up completely is that there is a statistic that 95% of the Ukrainians that presented themselves at the US-Mexico border seeking refuge were accepted. And now we are closer to almost 20,000, if not more, Haitian migrants that have been deported under Title 42. And what is the difference between the refuge that each group is seeking? So I'll stop there, and I hope to answer more questions. But I hope in that what I tried to give is that perspective that there is a different treatment that is being given to Black migrants simply because of the color of their skin. And the United States has the capacity and the creativity to figure out solutions that do not mistreat Black migrants and deport them to the places they were seeking refuge from. They've clearly demonstrated that with the Ukrainians.
Thank you very much, Ronald. And these numbers, these figures that you're presenting, they are breathtaking, no? Because just for being Caribbean, no, in the US, almost you double the probability of being stopped by the police, no? And that is just a manifestation of how racism acts or works differently. If you are Black, of course, in the US, but if you're migrant, you get it even worse. So thank you for that. So I will switch again to Spanish because I would like to return to Gladys to ask her, Gladys, regreso a ti, vuelvo al español. Y hace un momento en tu participación mencionabas sobre la lengua, ¿no? Incluso citaste a Odilia Romero, a quienes muchas conocemos, y el trabajo que ella hace, ¿no? Y ella habla de no hay derechos de las personas migrantes sin derechos lingüísticos. Eso es como un mantra, ¿no? Entonces, yo querría preguntarte, ¿no? Ahondar un poquito más en cómo el acceso a la lengua afecta a las personas migrantes, ¿no? Y cómo estas familias migrantes se enfrentan a ese racismo lingüístico en estos procesos.
Antes de eso, yo quisiera dar un antecedente. Fíjate que para notar la importancia que tiene la lengua según el ejercicio del poder y la distribución del poder en las instancias de dominación. El tomo 1 de la Ley de Indias, en el libro número 39, en su apartado número 13, dice que conviene enseñar la doctrina cristiana para que oigan con más veneración y admiración. Mándese a intérpretes de lenguas de indios. Título 13. Ahora, título número 43 propone, es un apartado que se suma a decir, se llama doctrineros que sepan las lenguas de los indios. Es decir, que en el momento del ejercicio de la dominación colonial, los colonizadores sabían que la dominación efectiva iba a pasar a partir de las lenguas. Yo he estado revisando las lenguas, los tomos sobre las lenguas de indios en el siglo XVI, en el siglo XVII, y cómo van a quedar consagradas en las leyes de Indias. Y utilizaban a los intérpretes para dos asuntos: para la pacificación, entendiéndose en dos términos: pacificación por la vía de la adoctrinación y el cristianismo, digamos, la adoctrinación cristiana, y la segunda para resolver algunos juicios, algunos procesos judiciales. A lo largo del tomo 1 hay muchísimos ejemplos en los cuales se hace uso de los intérpretes. Ahora, ¿por qué hoy día la educación, la salud, la justicia no consideran estas obligaciones? Y finalmente, si lo entendemos en el marco del ejercicio del poder, ejercer el poder o gobernar de manera efectiva debería de considerar esto que ya se consideraba hace más de 400 años. Y creo que es un ejemplo que nos permite mostrar la distribución del poder, el ejercicio del poder, sobre todo en el ámbito de la dominación. Ahora bien, ¿qué hacen las comunidades? ¿Qué están haciendo las comunidades? Pues de manera orgánica han ido formando a sus intérpretes, porque efectivamente se han visto afectados. No pueden negociar mejores condiciones salariales, dado que el lenguaje hegemónico es el inglés o el español. No pueden tener un proceso justo en los tribunales porque se carecen de intérpretes, o no se ve la obligación y la responsabilidad de tener los intérpretes. De la misma manera, en los hospitales hay una serie ya de eventos documentados por cielo de violación a los derechos de la salud porque no se consideraron los derechos lingüísticos. Entonces, no atender los derechos lingüísticos, no tener la responsabilidad de los derechos lingüísticos, está provocando una crisis en la vida de las comunidades indígenas, tanto quienes se han desplazado y quienes viven en cada uno de los estados. México, Guatemala, Perú y varios estados, pues es un ejemplo de ello. Entonces, yo quería presentar estos dos momentos históricos para mostrar el ejercicio del poder con respecto a la lengua en términos fundamentales. El hecho de que haya separación de padres, de madres y de niños, tal como dijo Ronald, obedece también a no garantizar un intérprete en esos procesos. Hasta ahí lo dejaría.
Muchas gracias, Gladys. Es muy, muy interesante, ¿no? Haciendo un comentario al margen y lo podemos platicar después, ¿no? En las siguientes rondas, pero creo que esta parte de que el Estado o digamos, elemento de poder, ¿no? De dominación, haya dejado de considerar a la lengua, ¿no? Probablemente tiene que ver con estos procesos de amestizamiento o ladinización, ¿no? Amestizamiento, no sé cuál es la palabra correcta. Y es una forma también de violencia porque antes al menos se reconocía, ¿no? La existencia de estas otras lenguas y de la importancia de usarlas, ¿no? Ahora ni siquiera eso sucede. Entonces, y como ejemplo es lo que le sucedió a Juana Alonso, ¿no? Juana Alonso, migrante guatemalteca que estuvo 8 años en la cárcel en México, porque simplemente ella no podía comunicarse en español por un crimen que evidentemente ella no cometió, al revés, ella era víctima del crimen organizado. Y es un ejemplo a lo que Gladys muy bien nos comentas. Muchísimas gracias. Ahora vuelvo al... I will turn to English again, so I will ask Ronald this time. Ronald, we were talking about all the languages, rights, and all these structural causes of racism, and that of course exist in migration as well. And you were talking about the Ukrainian migrants. So I have this question because I know from Paulina, which is now here in this call with us. She represents Espacio Migrante, an organization in Tijuana, and I was shocked by this data, no, that Mexico or the social organizations were asking the U.S. government to give more visas to Asian migrants, for example, and they said like we cannot process too many visas, no, as you were asking. But the moment the Ukrainian migrants arrived, they were able to process, you know, a lot of visas, no, and everything is possible if you have the will. What do you think lacks, or what do we need to do more as social and civil organizations to push for the governments to do it, you know, to have the will to do it?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And just to hone in on that statement, it's called the Unite Ukraine program. And again, I want to be clear. It's not that I do not want to support that community in their moment of need or that they don't need our help. But the reality is that that same type of empathy and practices and tools in the toolkit aren't being applied to other groups. And I also want to make a point to, you know, frame it that I will use, I'm Haitian, I'm first generation Haitian American. So that community is very important to me. And I do a lot of work with that community specifically, but I'd be amiss if I didn't bring up the other folks or other communities that are also stuck in Tapachula and that are going through these same traumatic experiences and not getting the support they need for relief. So the Cameroonians, Ethiopian, Mauritanians, Malian folks. So I just want to make sure that I get at the intersection of this and not just highlight it or express it as just a Haitian issue. It is a Black issue. But then to answer your question, I think what civic groups and social groups can do about it, I think the first step we have to do is in our advocacy and in our campaigning, we can't pit each other against each other. And what I mean by that is that, for example, I think the easiest way to describe it is maybe with the DACA experience and in terms of legislation. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was a bill that came through the House maybe last year that a lot of folks from a lot of different groups wanted to support. But I think where Baji was unique in, we weren't as supportive of the bill because of the fact that it left behind criminalized migrants, and which we know makes a stronger proportion, which is a stronger number of Black migrants. And so it's again that separation. You know, we can't seek relief or benefits for just a single group of migrants. We have to make sure it applies and it's inclusive, because we know Black migrants are most likely to get stopped, you know, for driving violations or whatever it may be, and then be criminalized for that, and then therefore be left out of a benefit that, you know, is a pathway to citizenship. So all of these things apply. So we have to make sure that in our relief and what we do in order to make sure that there's benefits being given to migrant groups, they don't actively leave a group of migrants out, which tends to specifically happen when we are looking at the chopping block and who's left behind. It is Black migrants. Like, for example, the MPP program left out Haitians. I mean, I think now it is inclusive, but in the first onset, it left out Haitians. So it was like, what happens to them? You know, and then again, when we're looking at the visa attributions, like where they go to, it's like Black countries always get the less amount of visa approvals. So again, it's that thing where it's like, as civic and society groups, the first place we can start is in our advocacy, making sure that our process and the requests we have is inclusive. And then I think secondly is again to not pit each other against one another, because I think our families are so intersectional You know, there's some folks that are here on TPS. There's some folks that have DACA. There's some folks that, you know, they may have a, you know, they're undocumented. So the reality is, as we see these intersections, even in our own families, we have to be clear that, you know, one thing that is good for one group may not, it doesn't include the rest of their families all the time, especially when we talk of immigrant communities. So we have to be sure that it is inclusive, but also we don't pit our priorities against each other. Because I think all in all, we need to create pathways that are for as many people and that would benefit as many people as fast as possible. Excuse me for there.
Thank you very much, Ronald. And I want to take this opportunity to tell all the audience that are here with us today that you can send your questions in the chat, because at the end of this hour, we will have a 10-minute space for questions and answers. And of course, please feel free to write your questions here. However, I'm going to read one comment from, I was talking about Paulina from Espacio Migrante, and she says that it's very interesting because in Tijuana, the only Mexicans who speak perfect Creole are Jehovah's Witnesses, the only people who make the effort to communicate with Asians in their language. So it is a little bit of two of the phenomena that we just talked with Gladys and Ronald, no? And I don't know, Diana is here. I've been told here. So welcome, Diana. Are you here?
Thank you, I'm here. Thank you so much. Apologies for being late.
Okay, so welcome, Diana. So I want to give you the microphone, but I would like to read your bio first. Diana James is president of the St. Croix Foundation for Community Development. Diana has served the St. Croix Foundation for more than 15 years, having the chance to support general operations, grant making, and educational program development. Mrs. James has managed the Foundation's fiscal sponsorship services for more than 40 small nonprofits and grassroots initiatives, which operate under the Foundation's 501c3 umbrella. Over recent years, Mrs. James has helped the Foundation to develop one of the single largest education reform initiatives in the territory in investment, scope, and impact. Mrs. James is a native of the Virgin Islands and looks forward to continuing to work to make the Virgin Islands a vibrant and prosperous community. Please, Diane, feel free to open your mic.
Hi, I'm here. Thank you so much for that introduction. I apologize for being late. I literally was on a 3-hour panel that I had to hop off to jump on this one, and having a really great conversation about decolonizing philanthropy. And so there's a lot of intersectionality between that conversation. This one, I'll start with just a caveat that our migration story is a little different because of where we sit in the world. And so as the only English-speaking US territory / colony, a third of our population is migrant, actually, is an immigrant population, which is huge. So, and then you add in sort of layers of historical migratory patterns. In the early 1900s, a large migration of folks from Vieques in Puerto Rico came to the Virgin Islands. And so we have a large Spanish-speaking population here. And in more recent years, an even larger now population from Dominican Republic. And so our story is a little, I think when we were talking about this conversation, what's really interesting is that the racial dynamics obviously are very different in that most of the immigrants here in the Virgin Islands are Black. And so there's a different layer of the tension that and the challenges that we've had to face here in the Virgin Islands, because it's not necessarily an issue of race, but an issue of class and an issue of geopolitical factors that most of the residents here have very little control over as a non-voting colony. And so a lot of the tensions that exist right now and that have existed over the years, because of these migratory patterns and because our population is so heavily immigrant, and these are some legal, some illegal, a large illegal immigrant population. And I don't even know what the right term to use about it, because they make up a huge part of how we live and who we are as a people, and their sort of adaptation to life here in the Virgin Islands has, I think, been much more seamless than we see on some of the border communities on the mainland. But a lot of it started because of unfunded mandates, with the erection of what was at the time the largest oil refinery in the world, was seated here on this little 84 square mile island by Hess Oil Refinery. And as part of that, the federal government allowed for migration of large numbers of folks from, there was a period of time in the late 60s where our population doubled in 1 year. And that's how significant an impact that was for a tiny little island with, under 100,000 people residing here. And the tensions that placed on our systems, our infrastructure, were huge. They exist today. Those tensions exist today, all these years later, because there weren't the resources or investments made to make sure that that migratory pattern would not compromise the integrity of our economic and social systems. Our educational systems still to this day struggles because of what happened 40, 50 years ago. And so it's very interesting to see, as a predominantly Black community, how differently the federal government addressed issues of migration than they do on the mainland, where issues of race are much more sort of evident and a huge part of the challenge and the tensions that exist there. And so when I talk about this issue of migration, I think I struggle a little bit, because I think for those of us in philanthropy, it's very easy to sort of default to this being a race issue. And there's no question, as a predominantly Black community that has lived under the umbrella of American imperialism and colonization, there's no one that has to have a conversation with me about the role race plays in American systems. But I think also from how we sit, and as a leader in philanthropy, I have to look deeper. I have to really go to the root of the issues and the social and economic issues that I think are where I have the ability to actually have agency and impact. And so we've really spent a lot of time trying to understand our community, but doing so through a lot of convening work that we're doing with our nonprofits that work most closely, particularly grassroots organizations that work most closely with our vulnerable and marginalized populations. And that has been such a powerful an inspirational investment for us at the foundation, because our reach is so much greater, and we have exponential sort of understanding of the communities that we're trying to serve. And also, I think a little bit more optimism, because we're meeting people where they are, and by convening nonprofits, we invested in a nonprofit consortium that had joined 30 nonprofits together, and really talking about systems thinking and how do we change the way we make investments from a philanthropic standpoint, and really nurturing and cultivating a culture of real collaboration, having deep, meaningful conversations about race and about inequities in our system. And the impact that has, the outgrowth of that work has been so deeply impactful, and has really taught us a lot in our work about how to really change systems. And the answer for us is always through relationship building. And how do you nurture the kinds of relationships where people on the ground, who are the closest to the people you're trying to serve, feel supported and feel joined by other stakeholders in the work that they're leading. And so I don't know if that like sort of takes us off topic, but it's very hard for us now to think in silos about like, okay, we're talking specifically about, immigrant populations and how to serve them. We have to think a little bit more holistically and how do we serve those with the greatest needs, and how do we serve as a facilitator for bringing organizations who are closest to those people to support them, and building the kinds of programming and advocating for the kinds of policies that will change the circumstances or improve the circumstances of that affected population.
Thank you very much, Diana. And it's a little bit related for what Ronald was saying, no? It's that we cannot compete, we are diverse, and within populations, we have also a diversity. So we need not, we don't have to divide it, we need to approach it holistically. I really liked it, this term. And well, in this other round, now that I have you, the three of you with me, I would like to ask you from your point of view, what are the anti-racist actions that you would suggest for the people that, we are working on anti-racism and with people in migration? What would you suggest to do? I'm gonna ask Gladys, switch to Spanish and let her first answer this. Gladys, empiezo contigo esta siguiente ronda y lo que yo les estaba preguntando a Diane y a Ronald era qué tipo de acciones antirracistas podemos hacer las organizaciones de la sociedad civil o incluso el Estado para evitar el replicar este racismo. Sé que es una pregunta muy grande, pero seguramente tú tienes mapeado ya algún plan de acción, ¿no?
Pues yo he estado trabajando cerca de Cielo, y Cielo ha estado haciendo un trabajo muy importante sobre la visibilización del trabajo migrante y del respeto de los derechos lingüísticos. Entonces yo puedo contar un par de recomendaciones que he visto que son importantes y que son funcionales. Y bueno, la demanda de la no separación entre derecho al trabajo y derecho lingüístico, la no separación al derecho a la salud y el derecho lingüístico, o el derecho a la educación y el derecho lingüístico. Yo creo que eso es muy importante para las organizaciones que se dedican a ese tipo de trabajos. Pensar el servicio, la interpretación no como un servicio, sino como una obligación, sino que como un derecho. Yo creo que ahí hay una clave también muy amplia, a una pregunta amplia como la tuya, una respuesta también amplia de esa manera. Y luego yo quería comentar, quizás me vaya a salir un poco, pero me quedé pensando en lo que Ronald decía con sus estadísticas de un 76% más de probabilidad si se es deportado y un 83% más de posibilidades según si provienen del Caribe y si son por el color de la piel. Me recordó mucho, por ejemplo, las estadísticas de las condiciones del por qué la gente o las comunidades indígenas iban a ser masacradas en el momento del genocidio de los años 80. Esas estadísticas me resonaron mucho porque varios estudios revelaban que el que se hablara un idioma, el que se usara determinado vestido, que se viviera en tal territorio, determinaba que 7 de cada 10 personas podían ser objetos de violencia estatal o objeto de que en sus comunidades pueden ocurrir masacres. Entonces, me recordó estas estadísticas que él nos ha presentado y que yo creo que en materia, para enlazarlo con tu pregunta, creo que es muy importante que quienes hacen estos procesos de investigación se fijen en ese tipo de contabilidades, en ese tipo de estadísticas, porque nos da un piso concreto desde dónde y con quién se está trabajando. Me llamó mucho la atención que él trajera estas estadísticas porque me recuerda que efectivamente 7 de cada 10 personas que cumplían ciertas características de idioma, de vestido, de habitar un territorio, podían ser objetos de alguna masacre, y de hecho sucedió. Entonces, creo que es muy importante que ese tipo de estudios no se pierdan de vista. También como una recomendación general a quienes trabajan con organizaciones migrantes, y actualizar este tipo de contabilidad o este tipo de estadísticas.
Muchísimas gracias, Gladys. Y aquí aprovecho para decir, ¿no? Cuando hablamos de racismo, muchas veces lo primero que nos viene a la mente es el tono de la piel, ¿no? Que si bien es uno de los marcadores raciales más evidentes, no es todo, ¿no? O sea, tiene que ver también con una cosmovisión, con la lengua, con la indumentaria, con un lugar de origen, ¿no? Que te pone justamente en esta situación en donde las estructuras, pues, oprimen de manera que hasta la vida corre peligro, ¿no? Entonces, muchas gracias por eso, Gladys. So I will turn to English now. Ronald, please, what kind of anti-racist actions would you suggest us to have?
For sure, like you said, it's a big and general question, but I think the first place I would like to start would be with the intersections of this work. And I say that because, you know, particularly, I think it was mid-June when we heard the decision, for example, with the Roe v. Wade situation. And it brought up a lot of the concerns with Black women in terms of, you know, their inaccessibility to some of the health rights that they deserve and require. And, you know, they spoke about the Black maternal mortality rate, etc. But in particular, I think what was left out is that what is the impact going to be for Black migrant women, Black migrant, and just migrants in general in that space? And where were the gaps going to be because of this decision? And so we can make sure, if we want to be anti-racist organizations or institutions, that's where we need to look at those gaps. And which brings me to my next point, which is that we have to think and reevaluate what we're asking for in terms of permanent protections, right? It is important to get immediate relief to our communities and to the groups we work with. So TPS, I'm not saying stop advocating for things like TPS or etc. But we also have to think of the permanent protections. A lot of the time, we can do a lot of good work to get folks released from detention, but then they have no housing, or that's inaccessible to them. So what do you think that leads to? You know, those patterns and those cycles we know that exist, unfortunately, and a lot of the other systems and realities that we engage in in this country and just in general for just to fulfill our life needs, those gaps exist there. So we have to think of permanent protections and think of the intersections of just not getting someone out of detention or getting someone across the border, but what are they going to need to live holistically? Because that is just as important to them as it is to any other group. You know, and I think we saw a lot of that specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic, where, you know, folks needed food, they needed income and support for their children, etc. And then finally, again, big question. So I don't know if I'm really getting at it, but I would love to talk a little bit of just in the philanthropy space. And the thing that we can do to be anti-racist is we have to lower the barriers. We have to be more flexible of how we're able to use the funding we receive, because our communities, when they need us to respond, when they need our support, they need it in a variety of ways that aren't always going to be in a traditional setting of a 9 to 5. In the work that I've done, when I was working, especially for Congresswoman Presley, I did a lot of casework. And folks didn't know if they weren't going to make it into the shelter homes, you know, between 9 to 5. These were emails or calls we would receive at 6, 7 p.m. And not that, you know, just more funding fixes all of those systemic issues, but again, it gets at that flexibility and barrier. So in the sense that we can look to be better about and being more or efficient anti-racist institutions and organizations, we have to be more flexible. We have to lower the barriers that it takes for our funding and how it's utilized, and the ability for us to be able to respond to our needs of our community. You know, we need to be more thoughtful, and again, back to the word inclusive and how we think about it. So again, I hope that's helpful in terms of answering the question, but I would love to discuss that more.
Thank you, Ronald. I think it's very good, because you were pointing out at the structure, no? Because racist policies not always are overt, no, and very and clear and open. They are subtle, no, like the ones that you were saying. You can release people from jail, but if they don't have housing, if they don't have health, they get into the trap again and again. So this is a very good example. And finally, Diane, what do you think about that? What can we do as an organizations for an efficient anti-racist response?
So my comments are squarely directed at philanthropy, at the field. And I think it's important for me to give a little bit of background that, St. Croix Foundation was founded by community activists, right? So we're founded by community activists in a predominantly Black communities, led by predominantly Black board. And they started out with this incredible reverence for civil society, for nonprofits. And one of the reasons that's one of the reasons we serve as a fiscal sponsor, their belief that you could be a grant maker and, feed a man for a day, or be a fiscal sponsor and, feed a nonprofit for a lifetime by building competencies around, strong operational structures and infrastructure. And so in 2016, we deepened our commitment to nonprofits by creating a consortium. And I tell this story because I think it transformed everything about, like how I said that earlier, that it transformed how we work, how we think, how we serve. I think philanthropy's got to move away from single issue fixes. It's not how it's going to happen. We've got to get out of the way of communities fixing their own problems. And the investments need to go to building strong, fortified, sustainable coalitions of nonprofits that can work together to address the issues that are most critical to them without the noise and the will of philanthropy sort of directing their efforts and their focus. And so by building this consortium, we did it it was necessity. Our community was going through a lot of economic and social issues. And we said, we have these relationships with nonprofits. Let's pull everybody together and begin talking about where we sit in this work and in this community. And we gave it a year. We gave the initial process a year with almost no agenda, almost could not talk about money because there was no trust. And we directed money. We sectored everyone out. There was arts and culture, health and human services, the environment, built a natural environment, and youth and education. And those sectors, I think the message that I hope I can share to my partners is that those sectors mean nothing. There's such deep collaboration happening around every single issue that our community is facing. From racial equity and anti-Black racism, we worked together, but it took a long time to work together to build a statement around equity and race that all of these organizations, some of which are white-led, came and rallied around. And we did real work around systems thinking to get us out of the silos of these issues, these single issue fixes. And what the trainer that we used, the consultant that we used that has continued to work with us around systems thinking, the magic in it is that by the end of every session that we have with her, and it gets deeper and deeper every time we work, was that we can sit any issue in the middle of the circle. And our civil society, our social impact organizations can figure it out together. And so there's not one answer to that question. That's kind of, I think, the answer from me is that there's not an answer. The answer is in the collaboration and the wisdom of the organizations that are sitting closest to that issue. And so I think that philanthropy has to think about directing resources differently to build these coalitions, empower those coalitions, provide them with operating money and leave them alone to do the work. to get out of their way while they figure out these really complex issues that are very personal to a lot of them that are living in those communities that are being, and living close to those communities that are being impacted. So for me, I think the answer is relationships. Like if you say, how do we fix it? We fix it through relationships. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but you know, one of the lessons we walked away from this work is relationship is the resolution. Like how you fix problems is that you've got to have people that are working together, that trust each other, that are passionate enough about the issue that's in front of them to stay the course to get to solution. And so that's like, that's the best I can do with answering that question.
No, it's fine, because racism is just a structure, very complex, and we can have clues, but the answer lies within our work, within our knowledge, and that's perfectly. I really like it. Working together, I think that's one of the key things that we can do. So I'm going to read very quickly the question for Gladys. Gladys, te voy a leer la pregunta que surgió aquí entre la audiencia para ti. Y dice, los migrantes indígenas siguen siendo invisibles en el camino migratorio. Solo dicen son guatemaltecos, por ejemplo. ¿Nos puedes dar algún ejemplo de cuáles son los retos únicos que están experimentando estas poblaciones en su país, en su trayectoria sobre México y al llegar a los Estados Unidos? Por favor.
Bueno, sí, la composición social de aquí, de Guatemala, son más de 24 pueblos, incluyendo los mestizos, pero son 23 pueblos provenientes de familias lingüísticas del pueblo maya. Su tránsito por México, en las estadísticas y en los albergues y en todo el camino, pues van a quedar invisibilizados, van a aparecer únicamente bajo el registro nacional. Y ese es un gran problema, el utilizar únicamente la nacionalidad y imponer el castellano como lengua de comunicación. Creo que es de los problemas más graves, aparte de toda la red de violencia y del control territorial que tienen que atravesar y en los cuales quedan ellos atrapados. Creo que en las estadísticas se dice efectivamente, sobre todo en las estadísticas de deportación, que los guatemaltecos junto con los hondureños ocupan también de los primeros lugares de deportación en los últimos meses, bueno, en los últimos años. Sin embargo, no hay una descomposición de las poblaciones y de las comunidades de donde están proveniendo. Eso significa pues varios problemas y yo creo que en tres órdenes, tanto en sus procesos de solicitud para solicitar el refugio o el asilo, la otra dimensión que es que no se garantiza un intérprete, y tercero, que tampoco hay un conocimiento de las causas estructurales por los cuales se están desplazando. Yo creo que es muy importante utilizar ese término. Las personas se están desplazando. Hoy mismo, por ejemplo, en las regiones Quechí, entre el Estor, se han desarrollado 2 desalojos donde han desalojado a 3 comunidades, pero eso es solo el día de hoy. En los días anteriores han ocurrido una serie de despojos y de desalojos de las comunidades. ¿A dónde están yendo todas estas personas que están siendo desalojadas? Pues una manera ha sido de salvarlo es a partir del desplazamiento, y en ese sentido, ese desplazamiento contemporáneo se parece mucho al desplazamiento de los años 80, cuando las personas tuvieron que huir para salvarse del genocidio. Entonces, creo que la pregunta que han hecho revela todas estas aristas. Ahí se juegan varios elementos: las historias del desplazamiento, el que no se garanticen intérpretes en sus idiomas, el que tampoco se tenga el conocimiento de las condiciones por qué se están desplazando y por qué están todos detenidos en la frontera norte, el por qué los niños queden separados de sus padres en Estados Unidos. Entonces, la pregunta es importante. aunque un tanto inabarcable, pero le agradezco profundamente porque de nuevo vuelve a poner el idioma en un lugar estructural y el idioma vinculado con estos procesos de despojo y estos procesos de guerra y violencia que ponen al racismo o que utilizan al racismo como elementos de jerarquización.
Muchísimas gracias, Gladys. Thank you very much, Diana, Ronald, Gladys. And I'm going to give the mic to Xiomara. Please, Xiomara.
Hi, everybody. My name is Xiomara Corpeño. I'm a program officer with the Four Freedoms Fund. I'd like to thank from the bottom of my heart, Diana, Ronald, and Gladys for today's conversation. We were asked to co-sponsor this with Hispanics in Philanthropy, and it's really an honor for us. I did just want to make note in terms of, part of this question of how do we all act, against racism. It's like this action piece. A lot of times I think we get stuck in analysis and critique. And so I'm just very proud that we have launched the Black Migrant Power Fund. We have a goal of raising $10 million for Black migrant organizations in the US. We are a domestic funder. I hope that we can expand that, but that's a long term. And we also started the Indigenous Migrant Initiative. And so again, going back to how do we invest in the communities who are directly impacted? And to speak to the piece, like, yes, philanthropy has a role, but I also want to encourage the organizations who do not have a focus on Black or Indigenous migrants in terms of what in your practices and your systems and your hiring practices are you doing to address these very important issues. And so, for example, we have a lot of Latinx-led organizations who continue to insist, hey, people can get by in Spanish, but they cannot. It's a very functional, it's like saying, je m'appelle Xiomara. That doesn't mean I speak French. Right. So, and I think it goes to our African and Black migrants, as well as to our Indigenous migrants. Like, we have to really think outside of the box and the binaries that we've been thinking about. So it's really been our pleasure to have all of you today. And we thank our audience today. This is the beginning of a conversation. And if folks have further questions, please reach out to our colleagues at HIP and also at Four Freedoms Fund. You can reach out to me as well if any of you are interested in the funds. Thank you. Oh, and the Observatorio Racismo Mexico too, doing some great work in Mexico. Thank you. We're gonna say goodbye to everybody, I think.
Thank you. Thank you all. Good afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.